Oh, I'm sorry. This section is for clients who can actually afford what they're looking at. The store manager didn't even try to lower his voice. A few customers turned their heads. One woman covered her smile with the back of her hand. Another man openly stared, eyes drifting from the tailored blazer to the watch on the woman's wrist, then back to her face as if waiting for her to admit the obvious. Maybe you picked it up somewhere. By mistake, the manager added, tilting his head with a thin, mocking smile. He didn't ask. He assumed. One employee crossed her arms, whispering loudly enough to be heard, "They always come in confident," until someone asks for proof. Then came the sound that made several people pull out their phones. Click. Cold metal closed tightly around the woman's wrists as an officer guided her hands behind her back with unnecessary force. "Ma'am, luxury watches don't just end up on random wrists," the officer said flatly. Someone laughed under their breath. But hours later, inside a federal courthouse, that same officer's fingers began to tremble when the courtroom doors opened, and a judge stepped forward with visible respect in her eyes. "Ms. Carter," the judge said calmly, extending her hand. The room fell silent. Because the woman they mocked was never the one on trial. Stay with this story until the end, because what happened next forced everyone in that room to confront something far bigger than a misunderstanding. Before we continue, comment your city and local time below. And if stories about truth, dignity, and consequences matter to you, consider subscribing, because the next few minutes may change how you see everything. Chicago, in early October, carried a quiet kind of elegance. The air was cool, but not yet cold. The streets lined with trees just beginning to turn amber and gold. People moved with purpose through the financial district coats, folded neatly over their arms, coffee cups, warming their hands as they stepped around reflections of skyscrapers shining in the glass surfaces of modern buildings. At exactly 3:18 p.m., Aaliyah Carter stepped out of a black rideshare vehicle and paused for a brief moment on the sidewalk of North Michigan Avenue. She did not rush. She never did. Her movements were deliberate, composed, almost effortless in their confidence. At 34 years old, Aaliyah had built a reputation in legal circles that many twice her age still struggled to achieve. She was known not only for her intellect, but for her calm presence, the kind of calm that did not need to announce itself loudly. Her dark brown eyes briefly scanned the storefront ahead of her, Hawthorne and Vale, a luxury watch boutique known for serving executives, investors, and collectors who often discussed timepieces the way others discussed art. The display window featured a limited edition Patek Philippe Grand Complication, priced discreetly but unmistakably at $162,000. Inside, the lighting was warm golden, carefully designed to reflect off polished glass cases and brushed metal surfaces. The store smelled faintly of leather and cedarwood, an intentional sensory detail meant to signal exclusivity. Aaliyah adjusted the cuff of her charcoal blazer before stepping inside. Her outfit was understated, but unmistakably refined. A tailored blazer, structured cleanly at the shoulders, an ivory silk blouse beneath dark tailored trousers, and simple leather heels that echoed softly against the marble floor. Her natural shoulder-length curls framed her face with quiet elegance, and her posture reflected years of discipline in rooms where being underestimated was often the first obstacle she needed to overcome. The bell above the door chimed lightly. A sales associate glanced up briefly, offering a polite but measured smile before returning her attention to a middle-aged couple examining a display case. "Welcome to Hawthorne and Vale," she said, automatically, the tone warm but distant. Aaliyah nodded once, offering a small smile of acknowledgement as she walked toward the service counter near the back of the store. She gently rested her left wrist on the polished surface. On her wrist, sat the watch. The Patek Philippe 5327G perpetual calendar. White gold casing. Cream lacquered dial. Moon phase complication. An object that did not shout wealth, but quietly confirmed it. The leather strap had loosened slightly over time, worn from daily use rather than occasional display. Aaliyah did not wear the watch for attention. She wore it because of what it represented. "Good afternoon," she said calmly. "The clasp has become slightly loose. I was hoping to have it adjusted." The associate's eyes dropped to the watch. For half a second, her expression changed not dramatically, but noticeably enough for someone observant to catch. Surprise, then hesitation, then something else. I see the associate replied carefully. "Do you have the original purchase documentation?" Aaliyah blinked once. "The watch was gifted," she answered evenly. "I have authentication records on file if needed, but I was told minor adjustments could be serviced directly." The associate nodded slowly, but did not reach for the watch. Instead, she glanced discreetly toward the far corner of the boutique, where a man in a navy suit stood reviewing paperwork behind a glass desk. Richard Lawson, store manager, 47 years old. Educated, articulate, attentive to appearances. He prided himself on reading people quickly. Too quickly sometimes. Richard approached with measured steps, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharply analytical. "Good afternoon," he said with professional courtesy that felt slightly rehearsed. "Richard Lawson." "How may we assist today?" Aaliyah repeated her request calmly, her voice steady. Richard's gaze shifted immediately to the watch. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "That is quite a rare model," he noted, his tone polite but probing. "Yes," Aaliyah said simply. Richard tilted his head a fraction. "Do you happen to recall where it was purchased?" "It was presented to me in Washington, D.C." Aaliyah replied. Richard nodded slowly, but something in his expression remained unconvinced. The couple across the showroom pretended not to listen, but had clearly shifted their attention. A young man near the entrance subtly lifted his phone, pretending to check messages while angling the camera lens. Richard clasped his hands together. "I hope you understand," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "We occasionally encounter situations involving replicas." The word lingered in the air. Replica. Aaliyah held his gaze. "I assure you," she replied calmly, "this is not one of those situations." Richard's smile remained, but it had grown tighter. "Yes, of course," he said. "It's simply standard procedure." Another pause. Another glance toward her wrist. "Do you mind if I ask what you do professionally?" The question sounded casual. It was not. Aaliyah had heard variations of it many times before. She understood its subtext. She chose not to react emotionally. "I'm an attorney," she said. Richard nodded again, though the answer did not seem to fully resolve his curiosity. "Corporate law?" he asked. "Civil rights litigation," she replied. That answer changed the atmosphere slightly, though not enough to dissolve the skepticism forming beneath the surface. Richard leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "It is an extraordinary timepiece," he repeated. "We simply need to verify certain details before performing any service." Aaliyah's expression remained composed. "You're welcome to verify the serial number," she said calmly. Richard hesitated, then nodded once more. "I'll just step into the back office briefly," he said. As he turned, he exchanged a glance with the sales associate that did not go unnoticed. Aaliyah stood quietly, her hands resting lightly against the glass display case. Behind her, the boutique's quiet atmosphere had subtly shifted. Whispers were not spoken aloud, but assumptions moved quickly. Richard closed the office door softly behind him. Inside, he picked up the phone. His voice dropped low. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'd like to report a concern regarding a high-value item currently in the store." Outside, the golden lighting remained warm. But something colder had already entered the room. Aaliyah did not yet know that within minutes her quiet afternoon would transform into something far more consequential than a simple watch adjustment, and that the assumptions forming in that moment would soon echo far beyond the walls of Hawthorne and Vale. Richard Lawson did not raise his voice when he spoke on the phone. He didn't need to. Years of managing high-profile clientele had taught him that authority often worked best when delivered calmly with an air of quiet certainty. "Yes," he repeated, pacing slowly behind the frosted glass office door. "A Patek Philippe grand complication. White gold. Condition consistent with recent wear. The individual is requesting service but cannot immediately provide purchase documentation." He paused, listening. "No, I'm not making accusations," he added smoothly. "I'm simply requesting verification." From outside the boutique still appeared composed. Soft instrumental jazz played overhead. The lighting remained warm and inviting. But the subtle change in body language among the staff revealed something else entirely. The associate who had greeted Aaliyah earlier now stood at a slight distance, no longer offering the polite attentiveness typically reserved for customers browsing six-figure timepieces. Instead, her arms were crossed lightly, not openly defensive, but not welcoming either. Aaliyah noticed. She noticed the shift in tone, the avoidance of eye contact, the almost imperceptible tightening of expressions when she glanced up. These were not new experiences for her. They were familiar patterns. Patterns she had studied professionally. Patterns she had challenged legally. Patterns she had personally endured more times than she could count. Across the showroom, the middle-aged couple whispered quietly. The woman leaned toward her partner, murmuring something behind the safety of her manicured hand. The man's gaze lingered openly now, curiosity no longer disguised. Aaliyah kept her posture straight, her breathing steady. She did not reach for her phone. She did not call anyone. She did not raise her voice. She simply waited. Moments later, Richard emerged from the office, his expression composed, but noticeably more formal than before. "Thank you for your patience," he said with a polite nod. Aaliyah returned the gesture. "Of course," she replied. Richard clasped his hands together again. "There appears to be a small discrepancy regarding the registration record associated with that particular serial number," he explained carefully. Aaliyah's brow moved slightly. "What type of discrepancy?" she asked calmly. Richard inhaled lightly, choosing his wording with care. "The model you are wearing is not commonly transferred privately," he said. "Most are sold through a very small network of authorized collectors." "I'm aware," Aaliyah replied evenly. "Yes," Richard continued, maintaining the same measured tone. "Which is why we are simply taking precautions." Precautions. The word sounded neutral, but its implication was not. "I've already offered to provide authentication through official documentation," Aaliyah said. "Yes," Richard replied, nodding slowly. "However, until that documentation is presented, we are obligated to ensure the item has not been reported missing." Aaliyah held his gaze. "And has it?" she asked. Richard paused just long enough to allow doubt to take shape. "We are currently looking into that," he said. The associate shifted her weight slightly. Another employee pretended to reorganize display cards that were already aligned perfectly. The boutique door opened briefly as another customer entered, then slowed noticeably upon sensing the tension in the room. Aaliyah rested her hand lightly on the glass counter. "You could have simply asked me to return with the documents," she said calmly. Richard nodded slightly. "That remains an option," he replied. But given the value of the piece, protocol encourages verification before release. Release. The phrasing was subtle, but unmistakable. The watch had not been taken from her, yet the language suggested temporary custody. Ownership under quiet suspicion. "I see," Aaliyah said softly. Richard offered a reassuring smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "I'm sure this will be resolved quickly." Just then the boutique's front door opened again. This time the change in atmosphere was immediate. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Officer Daniel Brooks entered first, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. Tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, his expression suggested a man accustomed to situations where explanations came later. Officer Megan Harlow followed her posture. Alert, her gaze observant. Both officers scanned the room quickly. Richard stepped forward smoothly. "Thank you for coming so promptly," he said. Aaliyah did not turn immediately. She already understood. Officer Brooks approached with measured steps. "Afternoon," he said, voice neutral but firm. "We received a call regarding a potentially disputed item." Richard gestured politely toward Aaliyah. "This is the timepiece in question." The room grew quieter. Even the music seemed softer now. Officer Brooks extended his hand. "Ma'am, may I take a look at the watch?" Aaliyah slowly lifted her wrist. She did not resist. She did not rush. She allowed the officer to observe the piece closely. Brooks' eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's quite a watch," he murmured. "Yes," Aaliyah replied calmly. "Where did you obtain it?" he asked. "It was presented to me," she answered. "By whom? A federal advisory board." Brooks glanced briefly at Richard, then back to Aaliyah. "Do you have documentation confirming ownership?" "I can provide it," she said evenly. "But I was not informed that would be necessary for a basic adjustment." Brooks nodded slowly. "I understand," he replied. "But given the value of the item, we need to confirm there has been no report of theft." The word landed heavily. The couple across the showroom exchanged glances again. The young man near the entrance adjusted his phone angle slightly. Aaliyah lowered her wrist. "Am I being accused of a crime?" she asked. Brooks shifted his stance. "We're simply clarifying a situation," he said. Officer Harlow observed quietly, her eyes moving between Richard Brooks and Aaliyah. Something about the interaction seemed slightly off to her. But procedure was procedure. "Ma'am," Brooks continued, "until we verify ownership, we'll need you to remain here." "Remain." Another carefully chosen word. Aaliyah gave a small nod. "I am not attempting to leave," she said. Richard folded his arms loosely, maintaining a posture of calm professionalism. "Again, this is simply precautionary," he added. Precaution. Verification. Clarification. Neutral words. But the direction of suspicion had already been decided. Outside, a pedestrian paused briefly at the boutique window, sensing an unfolding scene. Inside, tension moved quietly through the air like static before a storm. Aaliyah stood still composed. But something deeper had already begun, because assumptions once spoken aloud rarely remain contained. And what began as a routine request was about to become something far more difficult to undo. Officer Daniel Brooks had responded to hundreds of calls inside high-end retail stores during his 16 years on the force. Luxury boutiques, designer jewelry counters, private galleries, places where suspicion often arrived, quietly dressed in polite language and careful phrasing. He had learned to read tension quickly, to trust instinct, and most importantly, to maintain control before situations escalated beyond recovery. But something about this scene felt different. The boutique was too quiet, too observant, too ready. Aaliyah Carter stood near the service counter, her posture straight, her expression composed in a way that did not match the unease spreading through the room. Most individuals confronted in similar situations reacted immediately: defensiveness, frustration, embarrassment, sometimes anger. She displayed none of those reactions. Instead, she watched, measured, calm, alert. Officer Brooks took a slow step closer, his polished shoes echoing lightly against the marble floor. "Ma'am," he began, maintaining professional neutrality, "we received a report involving a high-value watch that could not be immediately verified." Aaliyah inclined her head slightly. "I understand what was reported," she said evenly. "I do not understand why verification could not have been requested without escalation." Brooks gave a tight nod. "That depends on the circumstances," he replied. Richard Lawson remained nearby, hands loosely clasped in front of him, projecting patience and cooperation. "We simply followed standard protocol," Richard added smoothly. "Given the rarity of the model, we felt it appropriate to confirm ownership." Officer Megan Harlow stepped slightly to the side, positioning herself in a way that allowed a full view of the showroom. Her training encouraged observation beyond spoken words: body language, tone, shifts, micro-expressions. She noticed several things immediately. The employees seemed unusually tense, the customers unusually attentive, and the woman at the center of the situation unusually composed. "May I see identification?" Brooks asked. Aaliyah did not hesitate. She reached slowly into her leather handbag, careful not to make sudden movements that could be misinterpreted. She handed him her driver's license. Brooks glanced down. "Aaliyah Carter," he read aloud quietly. His expression did not change. But something about the name lingered momentarily in his memory, as though he had encountered it somewhere before. He could not immediately place it. "Current address?" he asked. She provided it calmly. Harlow shifted slightly closer, observing the watch again. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. White gold casing. Perpetual calendar complication. Not an entry-level luxury item. Not something easily obtained. Especially not casually worn. "How long have you owned the watch?" Harlow asked. "It was presented to me 2 years ago," Aaliyah replied. "By whom?" Brooks pressed. "A federal advisory board," she repeated. Brooks exchanged a brief glance with Richard. Richard gave a slight shrug, the gesture subtle but suggestive. "We were unable to locate registration under that explanation," Richard said carefully. Aaliyah's gaze moved between them. "Registration databases do not always reflect ceremonial transfers," she said calmly. Brooks nodded slowly, but remained unconvinced. "Do you have documentation with you?" he asked. "Not physically," she replied, "but verification can be provided digitally." Richard interjected smoothly. "Unfortunately, until ownership is confirmed, we cannot perform service on the item." Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. "I did not request immediate service," she said. "I requested an adjustment appointment." The room remained silent. Brooks looked again at the watch. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "we need to ensure the watch has not been reported stolen." "I understand," she replied. But something in her voice suggested the situation had already moved beyond simple misunderstanding. Near the entrance, the young man holding his phone had stopped pretending to text. His camera lens now clearly faced the unfolding interaction. The middle-aged couple whispered again. Harlow noticed. Public attention could complicate even routine encounters. "Ma'am," Brooks continued, "would you be willing to accompany us while we verify the serial number?" "I am willing to remain here," she answered. "That may not be sufficient," Brooks replied. "On what legal basis?" she asked calmly. The question was not confrontational. It was precise. Brooks paused. Most individuals did not ask that question. Most did not ask it so calmly. "We are conducting an investigation involving possible possession of stolen property." he said carefully. Possible, Aaliyah repeated. Yes, Brooks confirmed. Without a theft report, she asked. Richard shifted slightly. We are still awaiting confirmation, he added. Aaliyah nodded once. I see. Her composure remained steady, but Harlow noticed something else now. Not fear, not frustration. Calculation. Deliberate restraint. The kind of restraint developed through experience. Brooks extended his hand. Ma'am, I will need you to remove the watch temporarily. Aaliyah looked at the officer's hand, then back at his face. For examination, she asked. Yes, Brooks said. She unclasped the strap carefully and placed the watch in his palm. The gold surface reflected the boutique lighting in a soft glow. Brooks examined the back casing. Serial number engraved precisely. No obvious signs of tampering. Harlow leaned slightly closer. This is authentic, she murmured quietly. Richard cleared his throat gently. Authenticity does not necessarily confirm rightful ownership, he said. Aaliyah's eyes moved toward him briefly, then returned to the officers. Officer, she said calmly, am I being detained? Brooks exhaled slowly. At this time, we are requesting cooperation. That was not my question, she replied. Harlow felt the subtle shift again. The conversation had moved on to legal ground. Brooks adjusted his stance. For now, yes, he said. We need to clarify the situation. The young man's phone camera captured every word. The whispering grew quieter. Anticipation replaced curiosity, because something about the woman's calm refusal to react emotionally created tension stronger than any raised voice. Brooks placed the watch carefully into a small evidence pouch provided by Harlow. Aaliyah observed without resistance. Ma'am, Brooks said, voice firmer. Now, please place your hands behind your back. A pause. Not long, but long enough for the entire room to feel it. Aaliyah did not argue, did not plead, did not protest loudly. She simply complied. Harlow stepped forward, retrieving standard cuffs from her duty belt. Is this necessary? Aaliyah asked quietly. It is procedure, Brooks replied. The metallic click echoed sharply through the boutique. Phones lifted higher. The couple near the display case stopped whispering entirely. Richard Lawson lowered his gaze briefly, exhaling through his nose, as though the situation had been resolved exactly as expected. Harlow secured the cuffs with professional precision. Aaliyah winced slightly at the pressure, but did not complain. Her expression remained controlled. Brooks nodded once. We will sort this out at the station, he said. As they guided her toward the exit, Aaliyah spoke calmly, her voice steady enough that both officers heard clearly. You may want to reconsider the direction of this situation. Brooks interpreted the statement as subtle resistance. Harlow interpreted it differently. Neither responded. Outside, afternoon traffic continued as normal. Inside, the quiet certainty of assumption had already taken hold. But assumptions once acted upon often create consequences far beyond their original intention. And the events set in motion inside Hawthorne and Vale were only just beginning. The late afternoon sun cast long reflections across the glass storefront as the boutique doors opened and the quiet tension inside spilled into the busy rhythm of North Michigan Avenue. People slowed instinctively. Something about the image drew attention immediately. Two uniformed officers escorting a composed black woman in tailored professional attire was not a scene that blended easily into the background of Chicago's luxury district. Officer Brooks guided Aaliyah carefully but firmly, one hand hovering near her cuffed wrists, as if anticipating resistance that never came. Officer Harlow remained slightly behind, scanning the growing cluster of bystanders who had already begun lifting their phones. The air carried the familiar hum of traffic, distant car horns, the faint echo of footsteps on concrete. But near the boutique entrance, everything felt unusually focused. Aaliyah stepped forward with measured balance, her posture still straight despite the restraints. She did not look down. She did not attempt to shield her face. She allowed the moment to exist exactly as it was. Inside the store, Richard Lawson stood just beyond the threshold, arms loosely crossed, watching with a restrained expression that suggested controlled approval. A sales associate whispered quietly behind him. "I knew something felt off," she murmured. Another employee nodded subtly. "People don't just walk in wearing a watch worth more than most cars." The words were not loud, but they were loud enough. Outside, a middle-aged man slowed his pace. As he passed, his gaze lingering openly on Aaliyah's restrained hands. "What happened?" someone asked from the small gathering forming near the entrance. "Possible theft." Another voice answered, speculation quickly transforming into assumption. Officer Brooks spoke calmly, but audibly enough for nearby listeners. "We're simply verifying ownership of an item reported under concern." Concern. Another neutral word. Another phrase that allowed conclusions to form without being explicitly stated. Aaliyah's wrists shifted slightly as she adjusted her balance. The cuffs were not painfully tight, but they were unmistakably present, cold, firm, symbolic. The young man who had filmed inside the boutique had now moved closer, angling his phone carefully. A woman beside him leaned in. "What did she take?" she asked quietly. "Watch," he replied. "Figures," she muttered under her breath. Harlow heard the exchange. She did not respond. Her attention remained divided between maintaining procedural control and observing the subtle shift in public perception unfolding in real time. Aaliyah stopped briefly near the curb as Brooks opened the rear door of the patrol vehicle. Before stepping forward, she turned slightly toward him. "Officer," she said calmly, "I would like it noted that I have cooperated fully." Brooks nodded. "That has been observed," he replied, "and that I offered verification prior to escalation." Brooks paused briefly. "That will be included in the report." Her expression did not change, but her words had weight, carefully chosen, precise. A passerby raised an eyebrow. "She sounds like a lawyer," he murmured. The comment lingered. Brooks gestured toward the open car door. "Please step in carefully," he instructed. Aaliyah complied without hesitation, lowering herself into the back seat with controlled movement, despite the limited range created by the restraints. Harlow closed the door gently but securely. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt louder than expected. Across the street, two teenagers slowed their pace, whispering as they glanced toward the vehicle. "Did you see the watch?" "Yeah." Why would someone risk that assumptions moved quickly when images lacked context? Inside the patrol car, Aaliyah remained still, her eyes focused forward. Her breathing remained slow, measured, intentional. Brooks walked around to the driver's side. Harlow entered the passenger seat. For a moment, neither officer spoke. Then Brooks activated the ignition. "We'll clarify everything shortly," he said without turning around. "I look forward to that," Aaliyah replied evenly. Traffic moved steadily as the vehicle pulled away from the curb. Behind them, the boutique returned to its quiet rhythm. Richard Lawson exhaled slowly, adjusting the sleeve of his suit jacket. "That was unfortunate," the associate said carefully. Richard nodded. "Yes," he replied. "But necessary." Necessary. The word settled into the room comfortably. Too comfortably. Back in the patrol vehicle, Harlow opened the evidence pouch, slightly examining the watch once more. "No damage," she noted. Brooks nodded. "High-end collectors usually insure items like this," he said. "Assuming it belongs to her," Harlow replied quietly. Brooks glanced briefly toward the rearview mirror. Aaliyah met his gaze without hostility, only composure. "Ma'am," Brooks said after a moment, "is there someone we should contact on your behalf?" "Yes," she replied. "Who? My office?" Brooks hesitated slightly. "You may place a call once we arrive. That will be acceptable," she answered. Her tone remained steady, not defensive, not submissive, controlled, professional. Harlow studied her reflection in the side mirror. Something about the situation continued to feel incomplete. Not incorrect, necessarily, but unfinished, unverified, uncertain. As the patrol vehicle approached an intersection, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dashboard. Brooks adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. He had handled far more volatile encounters, far more unpredictable individuals. Yet the quiet confidence of the woman seated behind him created a different kind of tension. Because confidence without visible support often collapsed under pressure, but hers did not. It remained intact, unshaken. And that made the situation harder to categorize, harder to predict, harder to dismiss. Behind them, traffic continued normally. But within the moving patrol car, something subtle had begun to shift. Because humiliation once made public rarely remains contained. And public perception once influenced rarely corrects itself quickly. The narrative had already begun forming in the minds of those who had witnessed the scene. A narrative built on assumption, on appearance, on incomplete information. And narratives once shared widely enough can reshape reputations long before facts have the opportunity to speak. As the city blocks passed steadily outside the window, Aaliyah Carter remained silent. But silence in certain moments carries more power than argument. And the officers transporting her did not yet realize how quickly the direction of this story would change. Because somewhere beyond their immediate awareness, the truth was already moving toward them, closer with every passing minute. The patrol car slowed as it pulled into the underground parking structure of the 18th District Station. The dull echo of tires rolling across concrete replaced the distant sounds of city traffic, creating an atmosphere that felt quieter, heavier, more enclosed. Officer Brooks shifted the vehicle into park, the engine idling for a brief moment before he turned the key. Silence settled inside the car, interrupted only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. For a few seconds, no one moved. Officer Harlow glanced briefly over her shoulder toward Aaliyah. "You'll need to watch your step," she said, her voice neutral but less sharp than before. "I understand," Aaliyah replied calmly. Brooks exited first, walking around to open the rear passenger door. The metal handle clicked, and the door opened outward, revealing the dim concrete interior of the station garage. Aaliyah stepped out, carefully adjusting her posture to compensate for the limited movement created by the handcuffs. The restrained position forced her shoulders slightly back, but she maintained balance with practiced composure. Most individuals showed visible discomfort at this stage. Tension, embarrassment, defensiveness. Aaliyah displayed none of those reactions outwardly, but internally she registered every detail: the number of cameras mounted near the garage entrance, the presence of 2 additional officers standing near the elevator corridor, the way one officer's gaze paused briefly on the cuffs before shifting quickly away, the unspoken awareness. Public restraint often communicated guilt long before facts were evaluated. Officer Brooks gestured toward the secured access door. "This way," he said. Their footsteps echoed softly as they entered the building's interior hallway. The station smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner, familiar, functional, impersonal. Aaliyah observed the environment without appearing to do so. The reception desk, the holding area to the left, Interview rooms down the corridor, everything arranged with predictable efficiency. A desk sergeant looked up as the group approached. "What do we have?" he asked. "Verification hold," Brooks answered. "High-value property concern." The sergeant's eyes briefly moved toward Aaliyah's restrained wrists. He nodded once. "Processing room 2 is open. Procedure. Routine language. Neutral phrasing that softened the weight of what was happening. Officer Harlow retrieved a small key from her utility ring and adjusted the cuff positioning slightly to ensure circulation was not restricted. "Let me know if the pressure becomes uncomfortable," she said quietly. "It is manageable," Aaliyah replied. Her tone remained composed. Brooks opened the door to interview room 2, gesturing for her to step inside. The room was simple. A metal table bolted to the floor, 3 chairs, a mounted camera in the upper corner walls, painted in a neutral gray tone designed to minimize distraction. Aaliyah sat carefully, her cuffed hands resting lightly against the edge of the table. Brooks placed the evidence pouch containing the watch on the table surface, the gold casing visible through the clear plastic. Harlow took a seat beside him, tablet device, ready for documentation. For the record, Brooks began activating the recording system. Today's date is October 14th. Time is 4:07 p.m. Present are Officer Daniel Brooks, Officer Megan Harlow, and Miss Aaliyah Carter. He paused briefly. "Ms. Carter, you are currently being detained while we verify ownership of a luxury timepiece presented for service at Hawthorne and Vale." Aaliyah inclined her head slightly. "I understand the stated purpose," she said. Brooks folded his hands on the table. "Can you confirm how the watch came into your possession?" "It was awarded to me 2 years ago," she replied calmly. "By whom? A federal advisory board connected to litigation involving veterans' rights." Brooks nodded slowly, typing brief notes into his report interface. "Do you have documentation verifying that award?" she said. "Where is that documentation currently located?" "In secure digital archives maintained by my firm." Brooks paused briefly. "Which firm?" "Carter and Finch Legal Group." Harlow's fingers hesitated slightly over her tablet screen. She had heard the name before. Not personally, but professionally. The firm had appeared in legal briefings circulated internally within the department months earlier. She did not comment immediately. Brooks continued. "Do you have contact information for the firm available?" "Yes," Aaliyah replied. "Please provide it." She recited the phone number calmly from memory. Brooks entered the information. "We will verify shortly," he said. Silence followed for several seconds. The camera recorded everything. Aaliyah remained composed, her gaze steady but not confrontational. Brooks observed her posture carefully. Still no signs of panic. Still no attempt to persuade emotionally. Still no inconsistency in her statements. "Ms. Carter," Brooks said after a moment, given the value of the item, "you understand why confirmation is necessary." "I understand verification," she replied evenly. "I do not agree with the assumption that preceded it." Harlow glanced briefly toward Brooks. The distinction was subtle, but precise. Brooks exhaled slowly. "We respond to the information we receive," he said. "And how that information is interpreted determines the response," Aaliyah replied calmly. Her words were measured, deliberate, not argumentative, but undeniably pointed. Brooks shifted slightly in his chair. Harlow reviewed the firm name once more on her tablet screen. Carter and Finch. Her memory stirred again. She opened a secondary search window discreetly beneath the table's edge. The result appeared within seconds. Senior litigation partner, federal advisory consultant, specialist in civil rights compliance. Harlow's eyes moved briefly toward Aaliyah, then back to the screen. She did not interrupt, not yet. Brooks leaned back slightly. "We will need to contact the firm to confirm your statement," he said. That would be appropriate, Aaliyah replied. Another pause. Then quietly she added, You may also wish to review the public record regarding the ceremony in which the watch was presented. Brooks looked up. What ceremony? The Federal Judicial Equity Symposium, she said. The name meant little to Brooks immediately, but Harlow's tablet search results continued populating rapidly. Photographs, press releases, professional profiles. A familiar face appearing repeatedly beside federal officials. Harlow's expression changed, subtly. Brooks noticed. You find something? He asked quietly. Harlow hesitated briefly. I'm still confirming, she replied carefully. Aaliyah remained silent, her composure unchanged, but the atmosphere inside interview room 2 had shifted almost imperceptibly, because information once introduced begins moving quickly, and once facts begin aligning, assumptions rarely survive unchanged. Brooks reached for the evidence pouch again, examining the engraved serial number more closely. For the first time since entering the boutique, uncertainty began to replace certainty. Not visibly, not fully, but enough. Enough to slow confidence. Enough to introduce doubt. Enough to suggest that what appeared simple might not be simple at all. And somewhere beyond the walls of interview room 2, the truth was already moving closer. Officer Megan Harlow did not consider herself easily unsettled. 6 years on the force had taught her how to maintain emotional distance in situations filled with uncertainty, conflict, and pressure. But as she continued scrolling through the search results on her tablet, the steady rhythm of her confidence began to falter. Aaliyah Carter. The name was no longer abstract. It was documented, verified, visible. A professional profile appeared on the screen, accompanied by a photograph taken less than 6 months earlier. In the image, Aaliyah stood beside 3 federal officials, her posture identical to the one she displayed, now composed direct, unmistakably self-assured. The caption beneath the image read, Senior Legal Advisor, recognized for contributions to National Civil Rights Compliance Reform Initiative. Harlow's eyes moved to the next article, a detailed summary of a landmark discrimination case settled for $42.6 million. The lead attorney listed was Aaliyah Carter. Another article referenced her testimony before a congressional oversight committee. Another displayed her speaking at a federal judicial conference. Each entry confirmed consistency, professional credibility, public visibility. Harlow lowered the tablet slightly. Officer Brooks, she said carefully, choosing her tone with precision. Yes, he replied, still reviewing the evidence pouch. I believe we may need to reassess our approach. Brooks did not immediately respond. Instead, he placed the pouch back on the table and folded his hands again. Explain, he said. Harlow rotated the tablet slowly so that the screen faced him. Brooks leaned forward. His eyes moved across the text quickly at first, then slower, then more deliberately. The shift in his expression was subtle, but undeniable. Recognition. Concern, calculation. You're sure this is the same individual? He asked quietly. Harlow nodded once. The physical identifiers match. Professional timeline aligns with her statement. Brooks glanced briefly toward Aaliyah. She remained still. Watching. Waiting. Not pressing the advantage, not interrupting. Allowing the facts to speak at their own pace. Brooks leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. Well, he said quietly, that complicates things. Or clarifies them, Harlow replied. Brooks did not disagree. He tapped his pen lightly against the table surface, considering the implications carefully. "Ms. Carter," he said after a moment. His tone noticeably more measured. "You mentioned the watch was presented at a federal symposium." "Yes," she replied calmly. "Do you recall the date of the presentation, September 18th? 2 years ago." Brooks nodded, typing the date into his report interface. Harlow conducted another search. Within seconds, an archived press release appeared. Federal Judicial Equity Symposium recognizes key legal contributors. Scrolling further revealed a photograph. A small audience applauding. A federal judge standing beside Aaliyah Carter presenting a commemorative item. The watch. Clearly visible. Brooks leaned closer. The engraving on the watch casing matched the description included in the press release, presented in recognition of legal service advancing equitable judicial standards. Brooks exhaled slowly. "That would have been useful information earlier," he said. Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. "I attempted to provide it," she replied calmly. The room fell quiet, because the statement was accurate and verifiable. Brooks tapped the table once. "Why was this not immediately confirmed through standard registry databases?" he asked. "Because the watch was not purchased through traditional retail channels," Aaliyah explained. "It was commissioned through a private contractual arrangement." Harlow nodded slowly. "That would explain the absence of commercial purchase records," she said. Brooks shifted in his chair. "Well," he muttered quietly, "that explains the discrepancy." A pause followed. Longer than previous pauses. Because the situation was no longer ambiguous. It was now procedural error. "Escalated procedural error." Harlow spoke carefully. "Sir, we should contact the firm she referenced." Brooks nodded once. "I agree." He retrieved the contact number provided earlier and entered it into the station phone system. The line rang twice, then connected. Carter and Finch, Legal Group, a professional voice, answered. "This is Officer Danielle Brooks with the Chicago Police Department," he said, maintaining formal tone. "We are attempting to verify employment credentials for an individual named Aaliyah Carter." A brief pause. Then, "One moment, please." Soft instrumental hold music played through the speaker. Harlow observed Aaliyah carefully. Still calm. Still composed, still patient. Moments later, another voice joined the call. "This is Jonathan Finch," the voice said. "How may I assist?" Brooks straightened slightly. "Mr. Finch, can you confirm whether Miss Aaliyah Carter is employed with your firm?" A brief silence. "Then yes," Finch replied clearly. "Ms. Carter is a senior partner specializing in civil rights litigation. Is there a concern?" Brooks exchanged a quick glance with Harlow. "We are currently verifying ownership of a timepiece associated with Ms. Carter." Another pause. Longer this time. Then Finch spoke again, his tone more focused. "The commemorative watch presented at the Federal Judicial Equity Symposium," yes, Brooks confirmed. "That item is fully documented," Finch said. "Our firm maintains authentication records. Would you be able to provide confirmation digitally?" Brooks asked. "Yes," Finch replied immediately. "I can forward documentation within minutes." Brooks nodded. That would be helpful. He provided the department email address. Finch responded. "You should receive it shortly." The call ended. Brooks placed the phone down slowly. Harlow watched his expression carefully. The certainty that had filled the boutique earlier was no longer present, replaced now by something more complex. Professional awareness, institutional accountability. Brooks looked toward Aaliyah. "Documentation is being forwarded," he said. "Thank you," she replied calmly. Harlow folded her hands together lightly. The situation was shifting quickly now. But outside interview room 2, the earlier public moment continued to circulate. Videos uploaded, commentary spreading, assumptions multiplying, and reputations already forming conclusions, because information rarely travels as quickly as judgment, and correction rarely spreads as widely as first impressions. Brooks leaned back slightly, processing the implications carefully. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "we are working to resolve this as efficiently as possible." "I appreciate efficiency," she replied. Another pause. Then gently but firmly she added, "I also value accuracy." The words carried no hostility, but they carried weight. Because accuracy in moments like this determines consequences, and consequences once triggered rarely remain contained. The email notification sound chimed softly on Harlow's tablet. Documentation had arrived, and with it the first undeniable confirmation that the assumptions made inside Hawthorne and Vale had begun to unravel. The soft chime of the email notification seemed unusually loud inside Interview Room 2. Officer Megan Harlow opened the message slowly, as if giving herself a final moment before the situation fully transformed from uncertainty into confirmation. The subject line was simple and direct. Authentication documents. Federal presentation item. Aaliyah Carter. Attached were multiple files. A formal certificate of presentation issued under federal seal. High-resolution images of the ceremonial event. Authentication verification from Patek Philippe's private client registry. A legal memorandum confirming transfer of ownership under a federal recognition program. Harlow's eyes moved carefully across each page, her professional training guiding her attention toward authenticity. Markers, serial consistency document formatting, official insignia, digital signature validation. Everything aligned. Every detail confirmed the same conclusion. The watch had never been stolen. It had never been missing. It had never been illegally obtained. It had been awarded. Earned. Recognized. Harlow lowered the tablet slightly, her expression controlled, but no longer neutral. "Officer Brooks," she said quietly. "Documentation confirms lawful ownership." Brooks extended his hand without speaking. Harlow passed him the tablet. His eyes scanned quickly at first, then slower, then again from the beginning. The room remained silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead light. Aaliyah sat calmly, her cuffed hands resting lightly on the metal table, her posture unchanged. She did not lean forward. She did not ask what the documents showed. She did not interrupt. Because she already knew. Brooks exhaled slowly, placing the tablet carefully on the table. "Well," he said quietly, "that answers that question." Harlow nodded once. "Yes, sir." Brooks pressed his lips together briefly, considering the next procedural step. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone noticeably more measured than before, "the documentation confirms your statement regarding the origin of the watch." "I expected it would," she replied calmly. Brooks gave a small nod. "We will begin the process of releasing you immediately." Aaliyah inclined her head slightly. "I appreciate the correction," she said. The phrasing was careful, not gratitude, not accusation, simply acknowledgement. Harlow reached for the cuff key. The metallic click echoed softly as the restraints loosened and opened. Aaliyah slowly brought her hands forward, gently rotating her wrists once to restore circulation. A faint red indentation marked her skin. She did not comment on it. She simply rested her hands lightly on the table. Brooks slid the evidence pouch toward her. "I apologize for the inconvenience," he said, the word inconvenience sounding noticeably insufficient in context. Aaliyah accepted the pouch, opening it carefully and removing the watch. The white gold surface reflected the overhead light again, unchanged, undamaged. She secured the clasp calmly around her wrist. Routine motion. Familiar motion. composed motion. Harlow observed quietly. "We will update the report to reflect confirmed ownership." Brooks continued. "The situation escalated due to incomplete information provided at the point of initial contact." Aaliyah met his gaze. "Information was available," she said evenly. Another silence followed. "Because the distinction mattered." Brooks nodded once. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "It should have been evaluated more thoroughly." Harlow closed the tablet, her expression thoughtful. Professional integrity required acknowledgement when facts became clear. Ms. Carter Harlow said carefully, "We appreciate your cooperation throughout this process." "I provided the same level of cooperation at the store," Aaliyah replied. Her tone remained calm, but the meaning remained unmistakable. Brooks shifted slightly in his chair. "We will arrange transportation back to the boutique if necessary," he offered. "That will not be necessary," she said. She reached into her handbag, retrieving her phone. Several missed calls appeared on the screen. Multiple messages, news alerts, social media notifications. The video had already begun circulating. Of course it had. Moments like these rarely remained private. Harlow's phone vibrated softly on the table as well. She glanced briefly at the notification preview. A video thumbnail. The boutique entrance, Aaliyah being escorted in handcuffs, view count rising rapidly. Brooks noticed the notification as well. He exhaled quietly. "Public visibility complicates matters," he said. "It clarifies them," Aaliyah replied. Brooks did not respond immediately, because he understood what she meant. Visibility often revealed patterns that isolated reports could not. A knock sounded lightly on the interview room door. A junior officer stepped inside. "Lieutenant Morales would like an update," he said. Brooks nodded. "I'll brief him shortly." The officer's eyes moved briefly toward Aaliyah, recognition flickering across his expression. He had likely seen the video. Everyone would soon. Brooks stood. "We will finalize the release documentation now," he said. Aaliyah rose smoothly from her chair. Her posture remained as composed as when she first entered the boutique hours earlier. But the atmosphere around her had changed. Authority no longer came from assumption. It came from confirmation, from documented truth, from institutional recognition. Harlow opened the door for her. As they stepped into the hallway, several officers glanced up from their desks. Professional curiosity, measured observation. Some recognized her immediately from the circulating footage. Others simply sensed the shift in tone surrounding the situation. Brooks guided her toward the processing desk. The desk sergeant looked up. "Resolved?" he asked. "Ownership confirmed," Brooks replied. The sergeant nodded once, typing a brief note into the system. Aaliyah signed the release form carefully, her handwriting steady. Again, Brooks said quietly, "I regret the misunderstanding." Aaliyah paused briefly before responding. "Misunderstandings often reveal larger problems," she said. Her words were not confrontational, but they were precise. Because this moment extended beyond a single watch, beyond a single store, beyond a single assumption. Patterns rarely appear clearly in isolation, but when documented repeatedly, they become difficult to dismiss. As Aaliyah prepared to exit the station, Harlow spoke once more. "For what it's worth," she said carefully, "I am glad the documentation clarified the situation." Aaliyah met her gaze. "So am I," she replied. But her voice carried a deeper meaning. Clarification should not have required escalation. Respect should not require proof. Dignity should not depend on documentation. Outside the station, the late afternoon sky had begun shifting toward evening. But the story that began inside Hawthorne and Vale was far from finished. Because while the truth had now been confirmed inside official records, the consequences of assumption had only just begun. By the time Aaliyah Carter stepped outside the 18th District Station, the sky over Chicago had shifted into the muted gold of early evening. The air felt cooler now, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves drifting along the sidewalk. Commuters moved with quiet urgency, unaware that inside the police building behind her, a chain of decisions was already being questioned. But outside the station, the story had already begun traveling faster than anyone inside could fully anticipate. Aaliyah paused briefly near the curb, her phone vibrating again in her hand. New notifications continued appearing every few seconds. Mentions, messages, calls from colleagues, calls from journalists, calls from numbers she did not immediately recognize. The video recorded outside Hawthorne and Vale had been uploaded less than an hour earlier. Already it had been shared thousands of times. A short caption accompanied most reposts: "Black attorney handcuffed over luxury watch ownership dispute." The footage showed only part of the truth. The moment of restraint. The assumption. The quiet humiliation. Not the verification. Not the documentation. Not the correction. Public perception rarely waited for full context, and in many cases, first impressions became permanent conclusions. A black sedan approached the curb slowly. Aaliyah recognized the vehicle immediately. Jonathan Finch stepped out from the rear passenger side, adjusting his glasses as he scanned the street. Jonathan Finch was known in legal circles as a strategist who preferred preparation over reaction. He rarely appeared in person unless the matter required direct attention, which meant he had already understood the seriousness of the situation. "Aaliyah?" He said, his tone controlled but clearly concerned. "Are you all right?" "I am," she replied calmly. Finch's eyes moved briefly toward the station entrance behind her. "I received the call from the department," he said. "And then I saw the footage." Aaliyah gave a small nod. "It escalated unnecessarily," she said. Finch exhaled quietly. "Yes," he replied. "It appears that way." Before either could continue, the station doors opened again. Officer Brooks stepped outside, his expression composed but noticeably more serious than earlier. "Ms. Carter," he called, maintaining respectful distance. "Lieutenant Morales would like a brief word if you are willing." Finch glanced toward Aaliyah. The decision was hers. Aaliyah considered the request briefly. "Very well," she said. They re-entered the station together, Finch walking beside her with measured calm. Inside the building, Lieutenant Carlos Morales stood waiting near his office doorway. Morales had served 22 years in law enforcement. His reputation emphasized accountability, professionalism, and procedural discipline. He extended his hand. "Ms. Carter," he said respectfully, "I appreciate your willingness to speak with me." Aaliyah accepted the handshake. "Lieutenant," she replied. Morales gestured toward the office interior. "Please," he said. Finch remained beside her as they entered. Morales closed the door gently. "I have reviewed the preliminary report," Morales began, "as well as the documentation your firm provided." He paused briefly. "And I have also reviewed the video currently circulating online." His tone remained calm, but his concern was evident. The situation should not have escalated to physical restraint prior to verification, he continued. Aaliyah listened without interruption. Morales folded his hands carefully on his desk. "We take incidents involving public perception seriously," he said. Finch spoke for the first time. "This extends beyond perception," he said calmly. "This concerns procedural conduct." Morales nodded once. "I agree." Silence followed briefly, because acknowledgement carried weight. Morales continued. An internal review has already been initiated, he said. Body camera footage will be evaluated alongside witness statements. Aaliyah spoke quietly. The issue is not only individual conduct, she said. It is pattern recognition. Morales inclined his head slightly. I understand your concern, he replied. Finch added carefully. Public trust is influenced by consistency of response. Morales did not dispute the statement. We are committed to transparency, he said. A light knock sounded on the office door. Morales glanced toward it. Yes. The door opened slightly. Officer Harlow stood just outside. Sir, she said there has been additional media inquiry regarding the incident. Morales exhaled slowly. Understood, he replied. The pace of consequences was accelerating. Morales turned back toward Aaliyah. I would like to ensure that appropriate corrective measures are implemented, he said. Aaliyah met his gaze. Accountability creates progress, she replied. Morales nodded once. Yes, he agreed. Outside the office, activity inside the station had noticeably increased. Phones ringing, voices quieter than usual. Professional awareness spreading quickly through the department, because incidents involving public attention rarely remained contained to a single report. Morales stood. We will remain in communication regarding this matter, he said. Finch gave a small nod. We will cooperate fully, he replied. As Aaliyah and Finch stepped back into the hallway, Officer Brooks stood near the processing desk. He straightened slightly as she approached. Ms. Carter, he said, voice controlled, but sincere. I want to reiterate my apology. Aaliyah regarded him briefly. Reflection is more useful than apology, she replied calmly. The statement was not dismissive, but it was direct. Brooks nodded once. I understand, he said quietly. Outside, the evening light had dimmed further city lights beginning to reflect across the glass surfaces of nearby buildings. Finch opened the car door for Aaliyah. As she entered the vehicle, her phone vibrated again. A new notification appeared. Breaking news alert. Civil rights attorney detained in luxury retail dispute. Sparks public debate. Finch closed the door gently. As the car pulled away from the station, neither spoke immediately, because both understood that the situation had moved beyond a single misunderstanding. The story was no longer private. It was now public, documented, discussed, examined. And somewhere beyond the immediate moment, additional voices were already preparing to respond. Because when truth intersects with visibility, consequences rarely remain limited to those directly involved. They expand. They travel. They demand attention. And the unexpected arrival that would soon follow would ensure that this incident could not be quietly forgotten. The black sedan moved steadily through evening traffic, the quiet hum of the engine blending with the distant rhythm of the city preparing for nightfall. Streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting long reflections across the windshield as Chicago shifted from business hours into something softer, less hurried. Inside the vehicle, the silence between Aaliyah Carter and Jonathan Finch was not uncomfortable. It was purposeful, measured. Each understood that the situation unfolding around them would require careful response, not emotional reaction. Finch finally spoke as the car stopped briefly at a red light. The footage has reached national outlets, he said calmly. Several legal commentators have already begun discussing procedural concerns. Aaliyah looked out the window. As pedestrians crossed the intersection, their conversations unaware of the larger discussion already taking shape online. That was expected, she replied quietly. Finch nodded. What was not expected, he continued, was how quickly it spread. Aaliyah allowed a small pause before answering. Moments that reflect broader issues often resonate beyond their immediate context, she said. Finch gave a thoughtful nod. Her phone vibrated again. This time the caller ID displayed a name she recognized immediately. Judge Patricia Cole. Aaliyah answered without hesitation. "Good evening, Judge," she said. The voice on the other end was calm, composed, unmistakably authoritative. Aaliyah Judge Cole said warmly, "I just reviewed the situation." "Are you safe?" "I am," Aaliyah confirmed. A brief pause followed. "I will be arriving in person," Judge Cole continued. "That will not be necessary," Aaliyah replied. "I believe it is," the judge said gently. "There are matters that require clarity." Finch glanced toward Aaliyah as the call ended. "She's coming?" he asked. "Yes," Aaliyah replied. Finch exhaled slowly. That will accelerate resolution. 20 minutes later, the sedan returned to the 18th District Station. News vans had already begun positioning themselves along the street. Camera operators adjusted equipment. Microphones prepared. The story had grown beyond a single social media post. Public attention now focused directly on the department. Inside the station, Lieutenant Morales stood near the entrance, speaking quietly with Officer Brooks. Both men turned as Aaliyah entered. Morales stepped forward. "Ms. Carter," he said respectfully, "we were informed that Judge Cole will be arriving shortly." "Yes," Aaliyah confirmed. Brooks straightened slightly. The presence of a federal judge added gravity no procedural review could ignore. 10 minutes later, the front doors opened again. Judge Patricia Cole entered with calm confidence. Her presence did not require announcement. Professional authority rarely did. She wore a navy coat over a tailored gray suit, her posture upright, her expression composed yet unmistakably firm. Several officers inside the station recognized her immediately. Morales stepped forward first. "Judge Cole," he said respectfully. "Lieutenant," she replied with a brief nod. Her attention then shifted directly to Aaliyah. Her expression softened slightly. "Aaliyah," she said warmly, extending her hand. Aaliyah accepted the handshake. "Thank you for coming," she said. Judge Cole's eyes moved briefly to the faint marks on Aaliyah's wrists. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Morales gestured toward the conference room. "If you would like privacy," he offered. Judge Cole nodded once. Inside the room, the atmosphere felt heavier, more deliberate. Judge Cole removed her coat slowly, placing it neatly over the back of a chair. "I reviewed the documentation provided by Carter and Finch," she said. Her voice remained calm, measured, but each word carried unmistakable weight. "The watch presented at the Federal Judicial Equity Symposium was issued under my authorization." Morales nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied. Judge Cole continued. "Aaliyah's work on federal compliance reform has contributed directly to structural improvements within multiple judicial districts." Her gaze shifted briefly toward Brooks. Her presence at that symposium was not symbolic, she added. It was earned. Brooks maintained professional posture, but the significance of the statement was clear. Judge Cole turned slightly toward Morales. "The concern here extends beyond a single procedural misjudgment," she said. Morales listened carefully. "Public confidence in institutional fairness depends on consistent application of verification standards," she continued. Finch remained silent beside Aaliyah. Judge Cole's voice never rose, but the authority within it required no emphasis. Morales nodded once more. "We have initiated internal review," he said. Judge Cole acknowledged the response. "I trust that review will evaluate both individual decision-making and structural protocol," she said. Morales inclined his head. Yes, Your Honor. Aaliyah remained composed throughout the exchange. She did not interrupt, did not elaborate, did not dramatize. Because the facts now spoke clearly enough. Judge Cole turned toward her once more. You handled the situation with restraint, she said quietly. Aaliyah gave a small nod. Escalation rarely produces constructive outcomes, she replied. Judge Cole allowed a brief pause. Nevertheless, she said, accountability remains necessary. Morales agreed. We are prepared to cooperate fully, he said. Outside the conference room, muted voices indicated increasing media presence, questions already forming, narratives already developing. Judge Cole placed her coat back over her shoulders. This matter will be discussed further, she said. Her tone remained calm, but the implication was unmistakable. Institutional awareness had now expanded beyond the local department. Brooks spoke carefully. Your Honor, he said, I regret the situation reached this point. Judge Cole regarded him briefly. Regret is appropriate, she replied evenly, then added, correction is essential. Brooks nodded once. The distinction was understood. As Judge Cole prepared to leave, she turned once more toward Aaliyah. I will follow up tomorrow, she said. Thank you, Aaliyah replied. When the judge exited the station, camera flashes illuminated the evening air. Questions were called out immediately. But she did not stop. Her presence alone had already communicated enough. Inside the station, silence lingered briefly, because moments like this rarely occurred without consequence. And once attention reached federal-level resolution, no longer remained optional. It became inevitable. As Aaliyah and Finch stepped outside once more, the city lights reflected across the polished surface of the watch on her wrist. The same watch that had triggered assumption. The same watch that now symbolized something else entirely. Because the moment the judge extended her hand in respect, the narrative had irreversibly changed, and those who had acted on assumption now faced something far more difficult to control: accountability. By the next morning, the story had moved far beyond Chicago. Major news networks had picked up the footage overnight. Legal analysts discussed the implications on early morning broadcasts. Social media feeds filled with clips of the moment Aaliyah Carter had been escorted in handcuffs outside Hawthorne and Vale, the polished storefront reflecting flashing patrol lights, as strangers recorded the scene from multiple angles. But now new details had begun surfacing. Details that complicated the narrative, details that shifted the conversation, details that forced many viewers to reconsider what they believed they had witnessed. Inside Carter and Finch Legal Group's downtown office, the atmosphere was controlled but focused. Staff members moved quietly between glass-walled offices, reviewing messages, responding to interview requests, coordinating statements. Jonathan Finch stood near the conference table, reading aloud from a tablet. 3 national networks have requested comment, he said. 2 legal journals are preparing editorial analysis. The Civil Liberties Accountability Forum has issued a preliminary statement referencing the incident. Aaliyah sat calmly across from him, reviewing a printed copy of the documentation already submitted to the department. Her composure had not changed. Not during the accusation, not during the restraint, not during the public exposure, and not now as the situation moved into broader institutional discussion. The narrative is evolving, Finch continued. The footage alone suggested uncertainty. The context introduces something else entirely. Aaliyah placed the document neatly back into the folder. Facts clarify themselves when examined fully, she said quietly. Finch gave a slight nod. Yes, he agreed. A large monitor on the conference room wall displayed a live news segment. The anchor spoke clearly. The attorney involved, Aaliyah Carter, has served as senior legal advisor in multiple federal civil rights compliance initiatives. Documentation confirms the watch in question was awarded during a federal judicial symposium in recognition of her contributions. The segment shifted to a clip of Judge Patricia Cole exiting the station the previous evening. Her presence had transformed the tone of media coverage significantly. Authority altered interpretation. Recognition altered credibility. And the story now extended beyond a single mistaken assumption. It now raised broader questions. How quickly had the situation escalated? Why had verification not preceded restraint? What role had implicit bias played in the decision-making process? Meanwhile, inside Hawthorne and Vale, Richard Lawson sat in his office reviewing an email from corporate headquarters. The message was brief, direct. Subject immediate administrative review. Richard read the first line twice. Pending investigation into procedural conduct, you are placed on temporary administrative leave. His jaw tightened slightly. The boutique floor felt quieter than usual. Employees spoke in hushed tones. The video had circulated widely enough that customers now recognized the location immediately. A young associate approached cautiously. "Do you think this will affect the store's reputation?" she asked quietly. Richard exhaled slowly. "Reputation is always affected by perception," he replied. But internally, he understood something more serious was unfolding. Corporate liability teams had already begun examining the situation. Retail environments depended heavily on consistent standards of customer interaction, and deviation from those standards could carry significant consequences. Back at Carter and Finch, a new email notification appeared on Finch's tablet. He opened it quickly. "This is from the Civil Liberties Accountability Forum," he said. Aaliyah looked up. Finch continued reading. "They are requesting consultation regarding potential policy review recommendations." Aaliyah nodded once. "That may be productive," she said. Her phone vibrated again. Another message, this time from a former client. "Just saw the news. Proud of the way you handled it." Another message followed, seconds later. "Thank you for continuing the work that matters. Public reaction was not unanimous, but many recognized the larger issue the situation represented, because the footage captured more than a single interaction. It reflected a pattern many viewers recognized from personal experience. Assumption before verification, conclusion before context, judgment before understanding." Later that afternoon, a formal statement was released jointly by Carter and Finch Legal Group and independent legal observers. The statement remained measured in tone, focused on facts, focused on process, focused on constructive outcome. No inflammatory language, no dramatic accusations, only clarity, only documentation, only emphasis on consistent application of professional standards. At the police department, Lieutenant Morales reviewed internal reports compiled overnight. Body camera footage provided additional context. Audio transcripts confirmed the timeline of escalation. Officer Brooks had followed procedural structure based on initial information provided. But the question remained whether the initial information itself had been evaluated critically enough. Morales understood that public trust depended not on perfection, but on willingness to correct. Officer Harlow sat quietly across from his desk. "We had opportunity to verify more thoroughly before escalation," she said carefully. Morales nodded once. "Yes," he replied. Brooks remained silent beside her. His expression suggested reflection rather than defense. "I made an assumption based on incomplete data," Brooks admitted. Morales did not interrupt. The assumption influenced procedural pacing, Brooks continued. Morales folded his hands. Recognition of that distinction is important, he said, because acknowledging decision points allowed improvement. Avoiding acknowledgement prevented it. Later that evening, another news segment aired. This time, the footage included the moment Judge Cole extended her hand to Aaliyah outside the station. The contrast between the earlier video and the later image was striking. Restraint followed by recognition. Suspicion followed by respect. Assumption followed by confirmation. Viewers responded strongly to the juxtaposition, because visual contrast often communicated more effectively than explanation. Inside her office, Aaliyah prepared notes for an upcoming legal conference scheduled weeks earlier. Her schedule had not changed. Her responsibilities had not changed. Her work had not changed. Only public awareness had. Finch observed quietly from across the room. "You understand this discussion will continue for some time," he said. "Yes," she replied calmly. "And you are prepared for that?" Aaliyah closed her folder. "I have always been prepared for the work," she said. Outside the office windows, city lights reflected across the glass skyline. Somewhere beyond the visible horizon, additional conversations had already begun. Policy review committees, legal analysts, advocacy organizations, institutional advisors. Because once truth becomes visible, it rarely returns to obscurity. And once a pattern is documented, it rarely disappears without examination. The events inside Hawthorne and Vale had begun as a small assumption, but now the full truth stood in clear view. And those who had watched the story unfold were beginning to understand something deeper than the incident itself. They were witnessing how quickly perception could shift, and how powerful confirmation could become when assumption finally gave way to fact. Within 48 hours, what had begun as a routine service request inside a luxury boutique had evolved into a nationally discussed legal case study. Law schools circulated preliminary analyses. Civil rights organizations released carefully worded commentaries. Corporate compliance departments quietly reviewed their own customer interaction protocols. The incident had entered professional discourse. Inside Carter and Finch, legal group preparation had shifted from reaction to structured response. Legal assistants organized documentation chronologically, ensuring every interaction connected clearly to verified evidence. The timeline now existed in precise order entry into Hawthorne and Vale at 3:18 p.m. Initial request for watch adjustment escalation initiated by store management law enforcement arrival, public restraint verification of ownership confirmation of ceremonial transfer, and subsequent acknowledgement of procedural oversight. Jonathan Finch reviewed the compiled report carefully. "We have no interest in dramatizing the situation," he said, adjusting his glasses as he read. "But clarity requires completeness." Aaliyah nodded slightly. "Accuracy creates stability," she replied. Finch placed the report neatly on the conference table. "The department has formally acknowledged verification failure prior to physical detention," he continued. "Their internal review is already underway." Aaliyah folded her hands lightly. "The objective is not individual punishment," she said. "The objective is structural improvement." Finch gave a small nod. He had expected that answer. Because Aaliyah Carter had built her career not on emotional reaction, but on institutional refinement. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Carlos Morales joined a scheduled video conference with Carter and Finch Legal Group and an independent compliance advisory panel. Morales appeared composed, though the responsibility carried visible weight. "We appreciate the opportunity to address this matter constructively," he began. Aaliyah listened attentively. "Our internal review has identified several decision points where additional verification measures could have prevented escalation." Morales continued. The advisory panel chairperson, Dr. Helena Ruiz, spoke next. "Consistency in verification protocol reduces reliance on subjective interpretation, she said. Morales agreed. We are evaluating updated training modules to reinforce evidence-based assessment prior to detention procedures. Aaliyah spoke calmly. Protocol clarity protects both institutions and individuals, she said. Dr. Ruiz nodded. Exactly. Meanwhile, Hawthorne and Vail corporate leadership released a public statement acknowledging procedural misjudgment at the store level. The statement emphasized commitment to inclusive customer service standards and announced mandatory bias awareness training for all retail management personnel. Richard Lawson remained on administrative leave pending completion of corporate review. Privately, the company's legal team had begun assessing potential liability exposure. Luxury retail environments depended heavily on customer trust. Incidents suggesting discriminatory treatment could influence brand reputation significantly. Inside the Chicago Police Department, Officer Brooks sat across from internal affairs investigators. His responses were direct, factual, measured. At the time of response, I believed the information provided indicated a possible property concern, he explained. The investigator nodded, and in retrospect, Brooks paused briefly. Additional verification should have preceded restraint, he said. Officer Harlow had provided a similar statement earlier that morning. The situation did not present immediate threat conditions, she explained. Procedural pacing could have allowed digital confirmation prior to physical custody. Internal Affairs documented both statements carefully. The distinction between procedural compliance and procedural optimization would play a significant role in determining departmental adjustments moving forward. Public discourse continued evolving as additional legal commentators contributed analysis. Some focused on implicit bias research. Others examined escalation frameworks. Others discussed best practices for balancing investigative caution with civil liberties protection. By the third day, the Civil Liberties Accountability Forum formally invited Aaliyah to participate in a national symposium examining verification protocols in public-private interactions. Her participation would not focus on personal grievance. It would focus on policy refinement. At Carter and Finch, junior associates observed the situation closely. One associate asked cautiously, "Do you ever become tired of carrying this responsibility?" Aaliyah considered the question briefly. "Responsibility exists whether acknowledged or not," she replied. Her tone remained calm. Recognizing it allows improvement. That evening, Judge Patricia Cole contacted Aaliyah again. "I have spoken with several judicial oversight advisors," the judge said, and Aaliyah asked. "They are prepared to review procedural guidelines related to ceremonial asset documentation," Judge Cole explained. Aaliyah nodded slightly. "Standardization reduces confusion," she said. Judge Cole agreed. "The objective is preventing repetition," the judge replied, "because prevention represented progress, and progress required examination." The following morning, Lieutenant Morales released an internal departmental memorandum summarizing preliminary findings. Key language emphasized enhanced verification, prioritization, expanded training in implicit bias recognition, and updated guidelines for high-value property disputes. The memorandum did not assign final conclusions prematurely, but it acknowledged opportunity for improvement. Officer Brooks read the memorandum quietly at his desk. Professional growth often emerged from difficult reflection. Officer Harlow reviewed the same document nearby. Institutional change rarely occurred instantly, but incremental adjustments often began with moments of recognition. Across the city, Hawthorne and Vail reopened with revised customer service briefing guidelines. Staff meetings emphasized neutral inquiry language and expanded verification pathways designed to prevent premature assumption. The boutique floor appeared outwardly unchanged. Glass cases remained polished. Lighting remained warm, but internal awareness had shifted. Back at her office, Aaliyah prepared materials for the upcoming symposium invitation. Her focus remained forward, not backward, because effective reform required looking ahead. Finch entered the office quietly. "The discussion has reached federal compliance advisory boards," he said. Aaliyah looked up briefly. "That was inevitable," she replied. Finch gave a small smile. "Your work often moves that way?" Aaliyah allowed the faintest trace of acknowledgement, because the situation had never been about a single watch. It had never been about a single store. It had never been about a single officer. It had always been about consistency, fairness, verification, respect. The legal response now developing would not aim to create spectacle. It would aim to create clarity. Clarity in procedure. Clarity in expectation. Clarity in accountability. Because systems improve when examined honestly, and justice strengthens when process becomes more reliable. The incident at Hawthorne and Vale had revealed a vulnerability. Now institutions had the opportunity to correct it, and that correction would influence far more than a single afternoon encounter. By the end of the week, the story had expanded far beyond Chicago's financial district. It had become part of a national conversation. Across social media platforms, millions of viewers had now seen the original footage recorded outside Hawthorne and Vale. The video's first moments, the visible restraint, the controlled posture of Aaliyah Carter, the quiet murmurs from onlookers, had sparked intense emotional reactions. But what sustained public attention was not outrage alone. It was contrast. The second wave of footage showing Judge Patricia Cole greeting Aaliyah with professional respect had reframed the narrative entirely. The juxtaposition between suspicion and recognition forced viewers to reconsider assumptions they themselves might have made. Major newspapers published detailed breakdowns of the timeline. Legal analysts discussed how easily perception could influence procedural decisions. Sociologists commented on how implicit bias often operates not through overt hostility, but through subtle expectation. For many viewers, the story felt familiar, not identical, but recognizable. Because countless individuals had experienced moments when appearance shaped initial judgment. The difference in this case was visibility, documentation, confirmation. Aaliyah Carter had not raised her voice. She had not escalated confrontation. She had not attempted to argue emotionally. She had allowed the process to reveal itself. And now the public was witnessing how often such processes unfolded quietly without documentation. Inside the Civil Liberties Accountability Forum headquarters in Washington, D.C., senior policy advisors met to discuss broader implications. Dr. Helena Ruiz presented an analytical overview. This incident demonstrates how verification sequencing directly affects perceived legitimacy, she explained. Charts displayed data collected over the past decade regarding escalation patterns in retail-related law enforcement interactions. Early confirmation procedures reduce unnecessary confrontation, Ruiz continued. Another advisor added, public visibility accelerates institutional response. The group agreed that structured dialogue could convert a single incident into meaningful procedural refinement. Meanwhile, at Carter and Finch, legal group incoming correspondence continued increasing. Several universities requested guest lectures. Professional associations requested panel participation. Policy groups requested advisory collaboration. Aaliyah reviewed each invitation carefully. Her acceptance criteria remained consistent. Conversations must focus on improvement, not spectacle, not accusation, improvement. Late Friday afternoon, Aaliyah accepted an invitation to speak at the National Legal Ethics Symposium scheduled the following month. The topic, Verification integrity in high-value property disputes. Jonathan Finch reviewed the event outline with her. The audience will include federal compliance officers, retail regulatory consultants, and municipal legal advisors, he said. Aaliyah nodded. Then the discussion may be useful, she replied. Across Chicago, Hawthorne and Vail corporate headquarters implemented additional policy revisions. Customer verification protocols now emphasized neutral inquiry language, mandatory supervisor review prior to law enforcement contact, and digital verification pathways before escalation thresholds were reached. Employees attended training sessions designed not only to prevent reputational harm, but to reinforce equitable service standards. Richard Lawson remained under administrative evaluation. Corporate leadership understood that public trust depended heavily on demonstrable commitment to fairness. Inside the Chicago Police Department, updated guidance memoranda circulated across multiple precincts. Lieutenant Morales presented summary recommendations during a departmental briefing. Verification sequencing will now prioritize digital confirmation prior to custodial action when immediate threat indicators are absent, he explained. Officers reviewed case examples demonstrating improved decision pacing. Officer Harlow contributed observations from the incident. Situational awareness includes evaluating the reliability of the initial reporting source, she said. Her tone remained professional. Reflective, focused on learning rather than justification. Officer Brooks listened quietly from the back of the briefing room. Professional accountability often required uncomfortable introspection, but introspection allowed improvement. Outside institutional environments, public conversation continued evolving. Commentators noted that Aaliyah Carter's composure throughout the incident had influenced public perception significantly. Her refusal to escalate emotionally had highlighted the procedural imbalance clearly. Her calm insistence on accuracy had allowed the truth to emerge without distortion. Editorial columns discussed the psychological burden of maintaining composure under scrutiny. Others examined how quickly social narratives form when incomplete information circulates. A recurring theme appeared across multiple platforms. Respect should not require proof of exceptional achievement. Respect should exist as default professional practice. Saturday morning, Aaliyah attended a previously scheduled community legal workshop focused on employment rights awareness. The participants, many unaware of her recent public visibility, engaged normally in discussion. She did not mention the incident, because her work remained consistent regardless of attention. One attendee approached afterward. "I saw the news," the woman said quietly. Aaliyah acknowledged her with a small nod. "You handled it with strength," the woman added. Aaliyah considered the statement briefly. "Strength often means remaining focused," she replied. The woman smiled softly. Outside the community center, autumn sunlight filtered through trees lining the sidewalk. Normal life continued, as it always did. But beneath the surface, subtle shifts had begun. Retail policy manuals updated language. Law enforcement training modules expanded verification steps. Legal symposium agendas incorporated discussion topics previously considered peripheral. Incremental adjustments, small changes, but meaningful ones, because social progress rarely emerges through dramatic transformation alone. It develops through accumulated refinement. One verified improvement at a time. One corrected assumption at a time. One clarified standard at a time. Later that evening, Aaliyah reviewed her notes for the upcoming symposium presentation. Her opening sentence remained simple. Professional dignity must never depend on perceived status. Jonathan Finch read the draft quietly. Concise, he observed. Aaliyah closed the folder. "Clarity reduces misunderstanding," she replied. Across the country, viewers who had watched the story unfold continued discussing its broader implications. Some recognized personal parallels. Others recognized institutional opportunity. Many recognized the importance of deliberate fairness, because fairness, when applied consistently, rarely attracts attention. But when fairness fails, attention becomes inevitable. And when attention reveals opportunity for improvement, progress becomes possible. The incident that began with assumption had now expanded into dialogue. And dialogue, when sustained constructively, often leads to meaningful reform. 3 weeks after the incident at Hawthorne and Vale, the effects of that single afternoon had spread into spaces far removed from the boutique's polished display cases. Conference rooms, training centers, policy committees, legal symposiums. What had once been an isolated misunderstanding was now being studied as a reference point for procedural refinement across multiple professional sectors. At the Chicago Police Department Training Division, a newly updated instructional module appeared on the digital learning platform used by officers citywide. Title: Sequential Verification Protocols in Non-Immediate Threat Scenarios. Lieutenant Carlos Morales stood near the front of the classroom as officers reviewed the case study presentation displayed on the projection screen. The training did not focus on individuals. It focused on decision structure, timeline sequencing, evaluation pacing, points where alternative action paths could have reduced escalation. Officer Megan Harlow contributed directly to the revised training material, providing practical observations drawn from first-hand experience. Situational assessment includes examining reliability of reporting context, she explained to a group of trainees. When the initial report originates from a third party with incomplete documentation, verification should proceed proportionally. Her tone remained instructional. Neutral. Focused on process improvement. A slide displayed comparison charts illustrating outcomes associated with early digital verification versus immediate custodial intervention. Data demonstrated measurable reduction in unnecessary detentions when officers incorporated expanded verification steps. Officer Daniel Brooks attended the session voluntarily. He listened without interruption, took notes, asked no questions publicly. Professional growth often occurred quietly, without announcement, without recognition, but visibly. Meanwhile, Hawthorne and Vale corporate leadership finalized revisions to their national customer service policy. The updated manual emphasized language neutrality, removal of subjective descriptors in internal reporting, and mandatory supervisory consultation prior to contacting law enforcement regarding ownership verification disputes. Store managers participated in guided scenario workshops designed to reduce assumption-based decision-making. Role-play exercises emphasized respectful inquiry phrasing, verification pathway mapping, customer dignity preservation. One training facilitator summarized the objective simply: professional service begins with professional curiosity, not professional suspicion. Inside the Hawthorne and Vale flagship store, subtle changes had been implemented. Employees now carried digital verification request forms, allowing customers to submit ownership confirmation electronically without interruption to service. Staff had been instructed to avoid isolating customers publicly during verification processes. Environmental adjustments were small, but intentional. Richard Lawson's administrative review concluded with formal termination of his managerial position. Corporate leadership cited deviation from established client interaction standards and failure to follow updated verification sequencing guidance. Public statements remained concise, focused on forward action, because companies understood that credibility depended not on perfection, but on visible willingness to improve. Across legal circles, Aaliyah Carter prepared for her scheduled presentation at the National Legal Ethics Symposium in Washington, D.C. Her topic drew significant interest: verification integrity and professional dignity in institutional encounters. Attendees included compliance directors, municipal legal advisors, federal oversight consultants, and policy researchers. Judge Patricia Cole attended as well, seated quietly among the audience. When Aaliyah stepped to the podium, the room settled into attentive silence. Her delivery remained calm, measured, precise. Verification procedures exist to establish clarity, she began. They are not designed to assign suspicion prematurely. Her presentation included anonymized procedural diagrams illustrating escalation points commonly observed in property-related disputes. The discussion remained analytical, evidence-based, constructive. Audience members took notes as she described how sequencing adjustments could reduce reputational harm while maintaining investigative accuracy. She did not dramatize the event. She did not reference personal emotion. She focused on structural refinement. One audience member raised a question. "What distinguishes precaution from presumption?" he asked. Aaliyah paused briefly. "Precaution invites confirmation," she said. "Presumption assumes conclusion." The distinction resonated because language influenced action. Action influenced perception. Perception influenced trust. Judge Cole later participated in a panel discussion addressing documentation protocols for ceremonial asset transfers. Standardization proposals included centralized registry access for law enforcement verification in cases involving government-issued commemorative items. Policy advisors recognized that clearer documentation pathways could prevent future confusion. Progress rarely required dramatic transformation. Often it required clarification. Clarification of process. Clarification of expectation. Clarification of responsibility. Back in Chicago, Lieutenant Morales reviewed updated departmental metrics indicating improved verification compliance across multiple precincts. Incremental improvement had already begun appearing in procedural reports. Officers demonstrated increased use of remote confirmation databases prior to initiating custodial measures. Small adjustments. Measurable outcomes. Officer Harlow noticed the difference during routine patrol activity. Situational pacing felt more deliberate, communication more precise, decision-making more layered. Officer Brooks observed similar changes. Professional environments evolve through cumulative experience. Sometimes improvement begins with uncomfortable lessons, but those lessons shape better judgment. Meanwhile, Carter and Finch Legal Group continued advising policy organizations examining procedural equity frameworks. Aaliyah's schedule remained full, but balanced, because the work itself remained the focus, not the attention surrounding it. Late one evening, Jonathan Finch reviewed updated correspondence with her. "Several municipal departments have requested consultation," he said. Aaliyah nodded. "Consistency benefits everyone," she replied, "because fairness protects institutions as much as individuals." When systems operate predictably, trust stabilizes. And trust sustains cooperation. Outside her office window, Washington's evening skyline reflected soft light across the glass buildings. The city moved steadily, unaware of how many small adjustments had already begun quietly improving professional interactions nationwide. Not through protest, not through confrontation, through refinement, structured learning, institutional accountability, measured progress. The incident that began with assumption had now contributed to broader clarity. Not complete resolution, but meaningful direction, because progress rarely concludes. It continues, adapts, strengthens, one improvement at a time. 6 months later, the story that had once filled headlines had settled into something quieter, but far more meaningful. Change had not arrived in dramatic headlines or sweeping declarations. It had arrived in subtle adjustments, revised training materials, updated policy manuals, conversations that previously might not have occurred. In Chicago, the Hawthorne and Vale Boutique continued operating as it always had, its polished marble floors, reflecting soft, golden lighting, its glass displays showcasing timepieces crafted with extraordinary precision. But the atmosphere inside had shifted. Customer interactions now began with open-ended questions rather than cautious assumptions. Employees relied on structured verification pathways that prioritized discretion and professionalism. Situations involving high-value items no longer triggered immediate suspicion, but careful inquiry grounded in consistent protocol. The difference was not visible to casual observers, but it was present. Consistent respect had become operational expectation rather than optional courtesy. At the Chicago Police Department, the updated training module introduced months earlier had now been fully integrated into continuing education requirements. Officers demonstrated improved sequencing in verification procedures, ensuring that custodial actions were reserved for situations involving clear necessity rather than uncertainty. Lieutenant Carlos Morales reviewed departmental performance data, reflecting measurable improvement in complaint reduction and response consistency. Institutional trust is not restored instantly, but incremental progress creates measurable stability. Officer Megan Harlow had since been assigned as contributing advisor to procedural training development, helping refine field decision frameworks that balanced investigative diligence with individual dignity. Officer Daniel Brooks continued active duty. His performance evaluations reflected increased emphasis on verification pacing and communication clarity. Professional growth rarely announces itself loudly, but its effects appear in improved judgment, improved awareness, improved outcomes. Meanwhile, Aaliyah Carter's work continued expanding. Her presentation at the National Legal Ethics Symposium had been requested for publication in a peer-reviewed legal journal examining procedural fairness frameworks. Her argument remained consistent. Professional dignity must exist independent of perceived status. Recognition should never be prerequisite for respect. Her work advising federal compliance initiatives expanded to include development of standardized documentation registries for ceremonial awards, ensuring that ownership verification processes would become more accessible to institutions requiring confirmation. One afternoon, Aaliyah returned briefly to Chicago for a scheduled policy consultation with municipal legal advisors. Her schedule remained tight but intentional. Work remained the priority, not recognition, not validation, not attention. After her meeting concluded, she chose to walk a few blocks through the familiar streets of the financial district. The autumn air had returned, cool and crisp leaves shifting gently along the sidewalks as pedestrians moved through their routines. As she approached the corner of North Michigan Avenue, the Hawthorne and Vale storefront came into view once more. For a brief moment, she paused, not out of hesitation, not out of discomfort, simply observation. The boutique windows displayed new collections arranged with the same careful elegance as before. A young sales associate greeted customers near the entrance, her posture professional, her expression attentive. Inside, a manager spoke quietly with a client tablet in hand, reviewing product details with visible care. No tension, no assumption. Just professional service. Aaliyah did not enter. She did not need to. The purpose of progress is not revisiting the moment of conflict. It is ensuring that conflict becomes less likely to repeat. Her phone vibrated softly. A message from Jonathan Finch appeared. Policy Advisory Group confirmed adoption of revised verification framework. She allowed herself a small nod. Forward movement. Consistent improvement. Meaningful adjustment. As she resumed walking, a young law student approached cautiously. "Ms. Carter," the student asked. Aaliyah paused politely. "I attended your symposium presentation," the student said. "Your explanation of verification sequencing changed how I think about professional responsibility." Aaliyah smiled gently. "Professional responsibility begins with awareness," she replied. The student nodded. "I hope to contribute to that work someday," she said. "You already have," Aaliyah answered. "Encouragement like reform often begins quietly, one conversation at a time." Later that evening, Aaliyah prepared notes for an upcoming advisory meeting involving cross-agency collaboration on documentation standardization. Her work remained ongoing, because fairness requires maintenance, justice requires consistency, respect requires intention. Across institutions that had reviewed the Hawthorne and Vail incident, procedural adjustments had already reduced similar misunderstandings, not eliminated entirely, but reduced. Improvement rarely produces perfection immediately, but it creates direction, and direction produces progress. As evening settled over the city, the reflection of streetlights shimmered faintly across the polished surface of the watch on Aaliyah's wrist. The same watch that had once triggered suspicion. The same watch that now symbolized something different. Not wealth, not status, but recognition of persistence, commitment, contribution. The story had never been about the watch itself. It had always been about how quickly perception can shape treatment, and how clearly truth can reshape perception. Professional dignity does not require extraordinary credentials. It requires consistent respect. Because fairness must exist before achievement is recognized, not after. And when institutions commit to improvement, individual experiences contribute to collective progress. The events of that October afternoon had revealed a vulnerability, but they had also revealed an opportunity to strengthen process, strengthen understanding, strengthen fairness. Justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it appears quietly in revised guidelines, improved conversations, and more thoughtful decisions. And sometimes the most meaningful victories are the ones that prevent future harm, rather than simply responding to past mistakes. As Aaliyah Carter closed her notebook and prepared for the next day's work, one truth remained clear. Dignity should never depend on explanation. Respect should never require proof. And progress should never stop at apology. It should continue through action. Because when fairness becomes habit, justice becomes sustainable. And when justice becomes sustainable, trust becomes possible.